but thank you for joining us. This is a nonpartisan forum, and we are asking for everyone to please remain on mute while our candidates are speaking. Our team will place a link in the chat that has videos on all the candidates for your review. You can review them now actually while you're listening in, or you can review at a later time, but they're putting that in the chat right now for your review on each of the candidates. Also, please place questions in the chat. Please include your full name, your email address, and the name of the candidate that you want the answer to come from, just in case time runs out. Our organization asks the candidates team to respond to your questions within a week's time of this forum, if they don't get answered this evening. Candidates will have 20 minutes to respond to questions, and within their time frame, they will be allowed to have 2-minute closing statements. I will now turn this over to our president of our illustrious chapter, Dr. Carmen Downs. Dr. Downs.
Thank you, Chair Bacon. First and foremost, thank you for those that are joining us to what is really one of our cornerstone events, and that is bringing candidates to you, the community. Many of you may just become newly familiar with the organization. So very, very briefly, the vision of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women is to see that Black women and girls live in a world where socioeconomic inequity does not exist. And among many of our core values is gender equality, inclusion, respect, and racial and social justice, just to name a few. So events like these help us to demonstrate our vision and the core values that we want to demonstrate daily. So now I want to turn it over to our Vice President of Programs, Kimberly Watson, to share a little bit more with you. Kimberly.
Hello, and I want to thank everyone for being here today. We appreciate you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. And I want to give a special thank you to our committee chair, Monique Bacon. Our Public Policy Committee is a wonderful group of women who are bringing you these forums from all of our candidates so that you, the voters, can actually hear from the people who want to serve you. Our organization has programs in the areas of health, economic empowerment, and education. We have a mentoring program, but today we are focused on public policy. And I want to turn this over to LaTanya Nelson, who is the co-chair of our Public Policy Committee. And thank you all again for joining us.
Good evening. Sorry. Good evening, everyone. My name is LaTanya Nelson, as she stated. I serve as the co-chair of the public policy, and this evening I am going to serve as your moderator. So we ask that you just take a minute, think. We have some very important races coming up as far as voting. Listen to our candidates. You have questions. We have instructions for you to follow in the chat, and just feel free to ask any questions that you have on your mind this evening. We're going to start with our first candidate. I'm thinking, are we ready? Okay, so our first candidate is going to be Captain Britta Steinbrenner. Is she in the room yet? Our technical assistants.
Okay, so we're moving up Captain Britta. Let me send her to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if you can pin her, I don't see. Oh, there she is. Hello, Captain Steinbrenner. How are you? Welcome.
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Thank you for taking the time out of your evening to come on and just kind of chat with us and give us what your platform is. I have to remind everyone that Coalition of 100 Black Women is a nonpartisan organization. So we're just sharing and giving input to the community in reference to this race that we have going on that will be coming up real soon. So again, we do appreciate you being here this evening. So I want to turn it over to you to give a little bit about yourself. We have some questions that we have specific that we're going to ask of you this evening. And we also have one of our coalition members who's monitoring the chat. So there will be a short question and answer period. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. Thank you very much. So thank you for the opportunity to address your organization. It's an honor to address a group of educated and successful women of color. I retired as a captain with the LA County Sheriff's Department after 35 years of service with an exemplary service record. I worked the jails, patrol numerous specialized assignments, and as I rose through the rank, I owe my success to 3 women mentors and one who still stands by me today. And she was actually one of the first female CHP officers before transferring to the Sheriff's Department. And as my last assignment, I had the largest command for a single captain. I oversaw a $130 million contract and I managed 450 employees. While working, I raised 4 children, 2 in the military, 1 is now retired, and then 2 in the medical field. And I decided at the age of 48 to go back to school to get my bachelor's and my master's degree. And I respect and admire all of you who have pursued your education and found your pathway into law, because I think an education is really, really important. So my platform, I am running to be the next sheriff because the Sheriff's Department lacks leadership, vision, and a strategic plan for the future. I, like many in the department and the public, are tired of the scandal and the negativity the current sheriff brings to the department. You, the public, deserve better. Therefore, we have to change the culture of the Sheriff's Department. I want our department to be known for community policing, not deputy gangs. I will reform the department inside and out, and that is with a command staff that's diverse and committed to change. My priorities are addressing the increases in crime, reforming our jails. I really want them to be state of the art, and I want to provide humane treatment for the homeless. I want to address our deputy gangs. I want to rebuild our problematic patrol stations into environmentally and community-friendly stations, rebuild our relationships with the Board of Supervisors, the Civilian Oversight Commission, and our community leaders, because we have to bring back transparency. So I'm going to focus on my community first approach for law enforcement, which is community policing. And that's the cornerstone of my administration. And that's going to change the culture of the department, but it starts with hiring new recruits. And they will include more people of color that reflect not just the diversity of LA, but the best of LA. And yes, that means more women on the department and more women of color in leadership roles. I'm going to be known for my policies of reform, being solution-oriented, and my ability to work well with others. These are 3 promises that are a testament to my commitment to leading the department, and you're going to hold me accountable for. Our ability to serve our community has been hampered by the lack of transparency and accountability, along with the many years of nepotism, favoritism, and the good old boy syndrome that still continues to this day. So I'm going to lead by example. I will partner with anyone who wants to be part of a team that brings the community and law enforcement together for the betterment of all. And if elected, I will be the first woman to run the Sheriff's Department. So I'm a qualified law enforcement professional. I'm practical, I'm honest, I'm natural, and I survived working in a male-dominated profession. So now is the time for me to step up to the challenge and change the culture of the department that the residents we serve yearn for. So I would ask that after today's forum that you go to my website, which is brittaforsheriff.com, and it's the number 4, and read more about my policies. And I hope you will like what you read, and I would be honored for your vote. Thank you.
Okay. All righty. Thank you. I do have a couple questions that you may have touched on, but I want to go ahead and ask so that those that just are joining us will have an opportunity to hear. So the first question is, Captain Steinbrenner, if elected, what will your plans be to improve the relationship between the community and law enforcement?
So community policing is the cornerstone of my term, and that is the highest priority that I have for the Sheriff's Department. And I want to reiterate that I want our department to be known for community policing, not deputy gangs. In 1989, when I first went out to patrol, I saw firsthand how important our relationship and trust with the community was and needed to be. And we have to rebuild the trust. We have to rebuild the credibility. And we have to refocus on building and rebuilding the relationships with the residents, the business owners, the community groups, clergy, and the schools that we serve. Right now, our department is constantly in the news, and all you hear is negativity, negative stories highlighting the sheriff and his wife, and it really portrays the department in a bad light. So for my community policing plan, which you could find on my website, I wanted to highlight a few of the changes that I'm going to implement, because one of my goals is to rebuild our problematic patrol stations. And if you can envision, I'm using East LA because that will be my first station, but I'm going to rebuild it. It's going to be environmentally and community friendly. It's going to have a community center, an amphitheater, athletic fields, after school programs for not only our youth, but for our seniors, because that is how you're bringing the community together. Then I'm going to create a new position, community liaison deputy. They're going to be out there. They're going to know what's going on in their community. You're going to see more deputies on patrol. They're going to be on bike and foot patrol. And captains at the stations have to take ownership of their stations, and they have to interact with the community and the businesses. They have to attend town hall meetings, neighborhood watch, visiting, forging relationships, and with the volunteers and the clergy especially, because I really want to bring those programs back and have them involved, because we need volunteers as an eyes and ears, and we need our clergy for the faith-based and just someone we can talk to and get some outside advice. Then I'm going to have a chief that's in charge of community relations to oversee revitalizing the community. We used to go out there and rehabilitate some homes that needed paint, new roofs, and business owners would donate our supplies. So I really want to bring that back. And then media relations and having a social media platform so you can push information out so everybody knows what's going on. So for me, community policing is a practice problem-solving technique. So you're working with residents, businesses, community organizations, and you're increasing the safety of the residents and the deputies, and it empowers the community to be part of the solution. And that is how I'm going to start rebuilding the trust and the foundation for our success. And I can tell you it worked, because I was in patrol utilizing community policing, and it really brought so much joy and benefits for the entire community and for our department.
Okay, thank you. My next question, if elected, how do you plan to build, recruit a workforce inclusive of African Americans?
So the recruitment process is so critical, and building and recruiting a workforce with the African American communities begins with recruitment. And I'm going to have several recruitment teams, and they're going to go out and they're going to visit high school, college campuses, military bases. I'm going to have out-of-state recruitment in order to mentor and recruit applicants. I'm going to be hosting job fairs, career days, scheduling open houses at our stations and specialized events so that the communities and the applicants see what we have. I want to provide mentorship, physical agility training, because you need to get in shape if you want to do the physical agility test so that you can physically and mentally prepare. But I'm also going to focus on sending recruitment teams out to our historic Black colleges and universities, because we have to build the pipeline for African American men and women who join the department, because not only is it joining and working, but I also want them to be promoted, and I want to give them the job opportunities. So that will take place through mentorship and encouraging them to transfer to other positions within the department, so you get other training, other diverse experience, and it gives you a better overview of the department. And then when it comes time for promotions, to have study groups to help wherever they're weak, to help them pass the test, pass the oral interviews, pass the job sampling testing, so that they can promote. And one thing I'm really going to push is hiring more females. If you look at our sworn staff right now, we're at 18.9%. And under the current sheriff, we've only increased women representation by 0.9%. And to put this in perspective, in the year 2000, we were at 15% women. We are now at 2022, and we are at 18. Oh, I'm sorry. In 2020, we started at 15%. 22 years later, we are at 18.9%. So in 22 years, we have only grown 3.9%. So my goal is by 2025, I am going to have representation of females on the department at 25%.
Thank you. And then this is the last question. And so that we'll have time for the community questions. In 2 minutes or less, can you tell me what will or can you do to uncover and reduce the negative impact of unconscious bias within the Sheriff's Department?
So your question takes me back to my community policing policy, because now we'll have a footprint within the community, and that will help to create programs and partnerships to help eliminate some of those unconscious biases. But I have to honestly say that I have to do training on my end with my personnel, because I don't believe a lot of my deputy personnel employees understand unconscious bias. And because we don't talk about it openly, I think some people are embarrassed to discuss it. So I'm going to bring in professionals. We're going to have some training so people understand that it's okay to think something, but you have to give people an opportunity. And we're not willing to do that because we have this mindset that this is this person and there's no chance for that individual to redeem themselves. So unit commanders have to be invested in their station personnel. We're going to have training on unconscious bias by bringing outside trainers. Supervisors are going to monitor their shifts, employees, and how we address the public, and especially when we get new employees to the station, to make sure that they feel welcomed. And then host community town hall meetings, events, attend different events. We have to listen, we have to be compassionate. And then I want community forums to address these type of issues so that they don't fester and they don't cause somebody harm. And one other thing, we've had 33 male sheriffs who have all promised to address similar issues, but we're still waiting for results. And I can guarantee you that I'm going to invest in my personnel. I'm going to invest in the community's needs and be transparent. And along the line, we're all going to learn and grow together.
All righty. Thank you. And thank you for joining us this evening, Sharon. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to my coalition sister, Nerida, who's going to take a couple questions from the chat.
Thank you, Latanya. So our first question is from AJ Ali. It is a three-part question, and his question starts with, if elected, what will you do to, 1, greatly increase the amount and consistency of tactical empathy training deputies receive, 2, increase intentional, ongoing, and positive interactions between deputies and the rest of the community, and 3, help people, especially young people, to respect and trust the Sheriff's Department instead of fear and hate it?
So all of these are part of my community policing plan, because we have to make the effort to regain the trust and the credibility with the community. And it starts with us being proactive. So one of the things, that's first. Number 2, one of the things that always disappears from our budget is money for training. Whenever there's a shortage, we stop on training. And I really want to revise our training program with our advanced training unit and also with the recruitment when we hire deputies onto the department. And we have to get professionals, we have to get instructors, we have to get people that are thinking outside the box, because sometimes in law enforcement, we have tunnel vision. And one of the biggest issues I have is we have a big gap between the youth and us in our age group. And that's why I want to go to the high schools, the colleges. I want them to get their degrees, and then I want them to have a career in law enforcement, because there's so many opportunities. But it's up to us to advertise that. It's up for us to handle all of this negativity so people want to come over, and then have mentors, role models, so that we can help them promote. So it's going to start with us, but I'm very committed to that, because I understood I had mentors when I came on the department, and I know how valuable they are. That's why I went back to school for an education and to have trainers. So hopefully I answered this all in one, but a very critical and important question. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Latanya, am I able to ask another question from the chat?
Yes, you are. We have a few minutes.
Great.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so our next question is from Dr. Theo Fowles, and his question is, What is the difference between the police departments and the sheriff department, and how do they interact / collaborate?
So when you talk about the police department, you have LAPD, and they are responsible for the city of Los Angeles. When you talk, and they wear their blue uniforms. When you talk about LA County Sheriff, we are county-wide. We do all the unincorporated county areas. Unless there is a city that cannot afford their own police department, then they contract with us. So you would have Santa Clarita, you would have Lost Hills. Those are two examples of sheriff stations that we patrol because they don't have enough resources, money to have their own police department. The sheriff's department, in addition to having patrols, we also are responsible for the jails, the courts, transporting our inmates to and from the courts and the jail facilities, and then also specialized units. When there's a mutual aid request or there's some type of an emergency, the different police departments call the sheriff's department and they ask for additional resources, and we will send our deputies or our helicopters or our special weapons team out to assist them.
Okay, great, thank you. So our next question in the chat is from Rashawn Chavis, and her question is, what will you be looking for when choosing a community liaison?
Someone who is honest, transparent, practical, a communicator, and understands and is willing to put themselves in the other person's shoes and look to see what that person's all about so that there can be a connectivity. We have to be able to relate to one another. And that is somebody who's also committed to being a public servant, because this is what law enforcement's all about. So, and I've done this many a times where I'm so focused on one idea and I have to stop. I have to take myself out of Britta, put myself in the other person's shoes to understand what they're thinking and how do I best relate to find a resolution. And the other individual that, or the community liaison individual, is somebody that I can work with, that is honest, that's a hard worker, and that's really, really dedicated. I mean, you have to love people to be in law enforcement. You have to love people to be in any type of community work. And I get the biggest reward when I can make somebody else happy. And that's how I was raised, is you always pay your good fortune forward.
Okay, great, thank you. I appreciate your response. Our next question is from Dr. Marcette Fauché, and her question is, what is your position on the issuance of CCWs? Los Angeles County is very strict in comparison to other counties. If elected, how will you make changes?
So from 2014 up until the sheriff took office, on average, the average sheriff was sending out or issuing 100 CCWs a year. This sheriff during this election year has issued over 3,000 CCW permits. I support the issuance of CCW permits, but there has to be a background, there has to be a justification, and the person has to be qualified. And I'm also looking into the possibility of having to have liability insurance when you have a CCW permit. Back east, they're looking into that. I have to research the legalities of it, but I do believe citizens have a right to protect themselves, but it has to be for just cause. And what I'm seeing right now with the number of CCW permits being released, it's for me, I look at it as a political gain, because it's an election year, and the building where the permits are being issued was one of the buildings that my personnel provided security for. And so we were watching what was going on, but I do support it, but I'm going to support it for all the right reasons.
No, thank you. Just for everyone's awareness, CCW stands for concealed carry weapon, I believe. And so just wanted to make sure that
I'm sorry, it's concealed weapons permit.
Okay. So thank you for that.
Concealed carry weapon, yeah, and we call it a concealed weapons permit. So,
gotcha.
But you were correct. You were correct.
Oh, no, thank you. Just wanted to make sure that everyone could follow the conversation. And so our next question is from AJ Ali. And his question is, what's an example of a time you treated someone negatively with bias? What did you learn about yourself from that experience? And what did you do to improve the way you treat people with equal justice and love?
Wow, that's a really tough question, because I will tell you that I had an individual that I didn't have much respect for because he was overweight. And when you are in uniform, for me, there's an expectation that you are professional in uniform and that you look good. And I have to admit that I passed him over for some opportunities to work on special programs. And what changed my whole thought process of him is I realized that I can't think that way, and I have to do something to help these individuals, especially as a security officer who's trying to become a deputy sheriff, and you have to be physically fit. So at East LA Sheriff Station, every Thursdays, I hosted running the bleachers, and this individual signed up, and I watched him struggle, but he came every Thursdays. So I started partnering with him, and I started doing the benches with him, and we started talking. And I learned so much about him that the beauty comes from inside. It's not just the outside, but you have this personification that you're in law enforcement, you're in uniform, you have to look, sharp. You have to be able to maneuver. But he taught me something. It's like, you can't judge a book by the cover, and you don't intentionally do it, but you find yourself doing that sometimes. And he turned out to be the biggest ally and is succeeding. And it just made me feel like he didn't know, but inside I'm thinking, boy, there's some lessons learned. And even though we're adults, we still learn, and we still make mistakes. But for me, if you make a mistake and you can grow from it and learn from it, I think I'm a winner in that respect.
Great, thank you so much. And so we have another question from the chat. And this question is from Alice Walker Duff. Her question is, what are the strongest specific levers for changing the current culture in the Sheriff's Department, not including hiring the right people?
So by changing the culture completely and putting a female in office, because right now there's so much negativity, nepotism, favoritism, and we've seen the same pattern over the last 33 sheriffs. I would be the 34th sheriff. And I have learned, I've survived working in a male-dominated career field, and it taught me how to be strong, a communicator, a multitasker, to speak my mind, to never give up, to have tough skin. But then again, I was placed in many positions where I had to take units and build them, mentor employees. I went back to school to get my degree. I was under the leadership of 5 different sheriffs, so I took their skill sets. And so you have to have somebody that is willing to invest in the deputies, in the organization, and in the community, and not use it for political means. This is supposed to be a nonpartisan race. It is not supposed to be political, and it is becoming so political. And I watch behind the scenes all the maneuvering that's going on. And I'm not that person. I am practical, I am honest, I am stable. I'm trying to do the very best. That's all I've done throughout my career. And that's why I've had such a blessed career, because I didn't get drawn into that. I'm firm, fair, and stable, and I can be trusted. And my track record can show for that. But in order to change the culture, I think it's time for a female to come in and really change things around and roll up the sleeves, and let's get to work and make this a department we're proud of.
Great, thank you for your response. We have another question in the chat, and this is from Christina Moultrie. Again, apologies if I mispronounced her last name. Her question is, there's a lot of discussion nationally about law enforcement officers with extremist views being allowed to remain on the force of their respective departments. What is the process at LASD to eliminate applicants and existing deputies who demonstrate or support racial extremist views on social media?
So we've had several scenarios with that, and that it usually starts with a complaint that's lodged by a citizen or another department member. So as the station captain, as the lieutenant who's assigned the complaint, they have to investigate it, and they have to investigate it quickly and promptly. And once it comes to our attention, then is it something that can be handled with internally with a performance log entry? Do we need to have a unit level investigation? And then the outcome of that, is it a termination offense? Is it something that we can correct with training? So it starts with the complaint process, and we can't push it to the side, and it has to be addressed. And we're seeing this right now with the use of force and how suspects and inmates are being treated. On my watch, that will not be allowed. There will be my goals, my expectations, my strategies. They will be known from day one. And I'm not going to tolerate any mistreatment of any resident, any inmate, any suspect, any employee. And that's going to be known. And supervisors, sergeants, and lieutenants, they're going to have to supervise. You can't be a friend and be a supervisor. Being a supervisor is not an easy job, but you have to look out for the well-being of the community and of the employee. So in essence, when that comes to my attention or to the attention of the captain or the sergeant, it's going to be addressed. And I really believe in investing in our employees. I just don't want to throw people away. But if they can't be salvaged, and if they can't make the decision that this is the career for them, then they have no business being in law enforcement.
Thank you. We do have a couple more questions in the chat. And this question is for AJ. His question is, in what ways will you interact in positive and loving ways with returning citizens to reduce recidivism and help them and their families thrive? Mentoring, job training, employment, etc.
So was this for inmates that are being released from custody? If you could repeat the question.
Sure. In what ways will you interact in positive and loving ways with returning citizens to reduce recidivism and help them and their families thrive? Mentoring, job training, employment, etc.
So my biggest emphasis, and where I'll have the biggest effect, is when I have inmates that are in my custody, that once it's time for them to be released, that we provide them with rehabilitation services, a step down program, because there's so many nonprofit and community organizations that want to help. And when we have inmates in custody, I want to reform some of their training to where they have medical, dental, to where they have training, where they can have some job opportunities, where we can give them hope and the ability to succeed once they're released from custody, so that they don't return. And that can be done. When we have our communities and we have homeless individuals in our neighborhoods and communities, I want to have the mental evaluation team there that comes with all the services there, so we can address the individual and get them the help and the services that they need, and have that pipeline, that infrastructure, to where we have the resources that we can put them through. But in both scenarios, we need to have social workers or someone that's monitoring them, that's keeping track of them, that's motivating them, that they go to counseling, and that we do their follow-up. And what I'd really like to see is, once they're successful, that they come back and they address these groups, to give them a story like, this happened to me and look where I'm at, to give them hope. Because a lot of these individuals, they're homeless, they're drug addiction, they've had some bad luck, but they don't have any hope. They don't have any motivation. And I think we can do that with law enforcement, with our contact, because ultimately, if we don't help them, who will? We're pretty much the last step.
Thank you for your response. Appreciate that. We do have another question in the chat, and it is a follow-up from Christina Moultrie regarding the social media question. Her question is, would you appoint an internal watchdog to watch for these posts and behavior?
Yes, I want to revamp the Sheriff's Information Bureau, because I want them to focus on social media, on the platforms. I want them to be able to push information out, both positive and negative stories about the department, so we're transparent. But then I also want to have the internal checks and balances with starting with a policy of how we're supposed to behave with social media. And then also I'm going to have the Civilian Oversight Commission, because they're going to be my checks and balances. So once I'm in office, I want to put together policies and programs so that people are aware and that we have something in writing, but that's clear, not something that's ambiguous, so people can interpret it in a different way. And that also starts with the hiring process. So when you're hired, you have to show us your Facebook accounts, your Instagram, and they do a thorough check of that. But that's something that we need to continue as we go through the department through our years. But I do have to check with that through the advocacy unit to make sure legally I have that capability.
Okay, thank you. We do have another question in the chat. And this question is from Michelle Walker-White. Her question is, understanding the cliques that are amongst the peace officers, how do you plan to monitor the bad behavior of the bad seeds?
So that's where I have my deputy gang policy, because our gangs have been around for 50 years and there's really no resolution yet. And so my apologies. So we've had the gangs have been around for 50 years. And so I want the DOJ, I want the FBI, and I want the Civilian Oversight Commission to do their investigation so that we can put it to rest, get the recommendations and move forward. So when I take office, we're going to hit the reset button and everybody's going to get a new chance. But moving forward, I will not tolerate deputy gangs, cliques, subgroups. They'll be eliminated. And anyone who commits criminal activity, both on or off duty, they're not going to be employed. I'm not going to handle it, and it's going to be investigated. But starting with that, there's some protocols that I'll have in place. And it's, again, station captains taking ownership when having a 1-800 complaint line, having a civilian oversight team that does the investigations when those type of allegations come to light. I'm looking at deputy rotations so that deputies don't stay in one position for too long, so that they don't take ownership, such as a watch deputy or a field training officer, to where they feel that they're in command of the shift that they're on, or the street or the block that they're in. There's the sergeants have to supervise. And that's why I want to change the image with East LA Station, creating a new station, a new environment, going out with the old, bringing in the new. But it's going to start with me. I set the tone and I set my expectations and my vision. And it's the unit commander that has to monitor the workforce, his employees. And as soon as there's any indication, it gets investigated, it gets researched so that we can handle it before it festers in something bigger.
Okay, thank you. So that concludes our questions for this portion of the evening. And so I'd like to turn it back over to LaTanya Nelson. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Steinbrenner, Britta. We'd appreciate you coming on this afternoon, and for closing remarks and sending us out. I'm going to turn it over to our first VP, my coalition sister, Kimberly Watson. Again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
On behalf of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, we thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate you spending the time meeting and learning about our candidates who are wishing to serve as sheriff here in LA County. We thank you for your patience. We appreciate you utilizing our platform to help share your message to the community and assist them in making informed decisions at this election.
Thank you.
Thank you. Also, I wanted to know, I was just informed that I needed to give you 2 minutes your last 2 minutes before. I should have done that before, so I apologize. Sorry, Coalition Sister Kimberly. So Captain Brenner, you have 2 minutes as your last and closing words.
So I just wanted to reiterate the fact that I've dedicated 35 years to this department, and I absolutely love this department. And the way our department is going, you can't just stand by and complain. You have to take action. And I believe that I have what it takes to make this department a much better department and turn it around. And I will tell you, my motivation is when I was a deputy in patrol, I was hit by a car while I was directing traffic, and I was never supposed to walk again. But the community members, my station personnel, they all rallied around me, and 6 months later, I was back to work. And I never forgot their good, the love, the support that they gave me. And from that point on, I've always paid it forward. And I, in good conscience, cannot leave the department in the hands that it is right now. I believe that I have one last job to do, and that's to turn this department around, to make it a department that everybody feels welcomed, secured, and safe. And that can be done, but I can't do it alone. It's going to take myself, the Sheriff's Department, and the community to rally around one another so that we can affect the change that we all are yearning for today. So with that, I thank you for your time. I thank you for the questions. I really appreciate the ability to be able to speak in person, because there's a much better message than when you're just doing on Facebook or you're texting or policies. But I hope you see how sincere I am and how motivated I am. And I really hope that you'll join me on this journey, because it will be a historic moment to have the first female sheriff in office. So please, my website, brittaforsheriff.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Steinbrenner. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And again, thank you for joining us.
Okay.
Good evening.
Bye-bye.
So as Captain Steinbrenner drops off, we're going to pause for a second, and we're going to let our next candidate in, Chief Cecil Rhambo. Just 1 second.
All right, here we go.
Is our community good? Everybody out there?
Welcome.
All right,
Chief
go ahead.
Rhambo. Now, I want to see if you wanted to give any housekeeping before we started, because we had some others join in. So
very
I'm
good,
not sure.
Latanya. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Okay, thank
Again,
you.
those of you who just showed up, my name is Monique Bacon, Public Policy Chair for the National Coalition of 100 Black Women. And thank you for joining us. This is just a reminder that this is a nonpartisan forum. We are asking for everyone to please remain on mute. Our team will place a link in the chat that has videos on all of the candidates for your review as you're going through this session or at a later time. Also, please place your questions in the chat, include your full name, email address, and the name of the candidate that you want to answer, and just in case time runs out. Our organization asked the candidates team to respond to your question within a week's time of this forum if they don't get a chance to answer your questions this evening. Candidates will have 20 minutes to respond to questions, and within their time frame, they will be allowed to have 2 minutes closing statements. I will now turn this over again to our illustrious moderator, Latanya Nelson. Latanya.
Thank you, Coalition Sister Monique. Good evening, Chief Rhambo. We welcome you and we thank you for joining us this evening. We have you here to address the community in reference to your run for Los Angeles County Sheriff this afternoon. This run this evening. So what we're going to do is just give us a 2-minute kind of brief history of your background, and then we have a couple questions that specific that we're going to ask, and then we're going to take questions from the community in the chat. Okay, so again, I'm Latanya Nelson. I'm serving as a moderator, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you again for joining us.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I know this is a lot of work. I'm glad you guys are all civically engaged, and it's really, really appreciated, particularly in our community. So I've been a member of the community since I was born in '59. I actually got here in late 1959. I'm adopted from an orphanage. My parents were African-American and lived in Compton, and literally picked me out of a photo album and flew me over from South Korea. I'm biracial. And I found my father later when I was 57, but that's a whole nother story. And I grew up in Compton in South Central. I went to Washington High School, Henry Clay Junior High School. I got a degree from Humboldt State University in sociology. I worked 3 jobs to put my way through college because my dad, quite frankly, had an 8th grade education, and my mother was a laborer. And I literally used to go with her to clean houses in Ladera Heights back in the day. But I spent 33 years in the Sheriff's Department, where I worked everything from undercover narcotics with the FBI to internal affairs on 2 different occasions at 2 different ranks. I also ran the Asian Organized Crime Task Force, where I did outreach to the API community and investigated crimes committed by and against the API community. I also led the Hate Crimes Task Force, and really put together an award-winning platform that is in use today on dealing with tolerance and hate, where we used actual victims of hate crimes and reenacted their victimization in a film for students to learn out of junior high and high school level classes. I retired from the Sheriff's Department in 2014, but before that, I actually worked in the Alternatives to Incarceration and worked on AB 109, the Community Corrections Partnership, working with a collaboration of a host of people that looked at ways for alternatives to incarceration and alternatives to rehabilitation and reentry. After retirement in 2014, I was recruited based on my integrity, my leadership, and really all my endorsements and people that I know to be an assistant city manager in Carson. I did that for almost 3 years, where I worked on not only just overall public service delivery, but I also ran a one-stop, which is a workforce investment employment development board there at Carson, where we employed folks, including people coming back to the community through transition subsidized employment. I went over to Compton as the city manager there, where I actually led the city in terms of economic development, housing. I ran a Section 8 program, and basically I managed the entire city in the budget, including the sheriff's contract at both Compton and Carson. Then I got recruited to be the chief of police at the largest aviation police department in the nation, which is LAX and Van Nuys airports, where we provide safety for over 90 million passengers a year. And I security badge over 51,000 employees on the airport property that work in and around the airport. And I'm running for sheriff because I'm the most qualified candidate ever to actually have run for this particular seat. And I'm really energized and enthusiastic about it because I'm from the community, and I really, really am looking forward to creating a new normal.
Okay, thank you. So now we'll go ahead and start with our first question. If you can give us in 2 minutes, if elected, what will your plans be to improve the relationship between the community and law enforcement?
Well, I have a lot of experience doing that. When we went to Compton in 2000 and took over police in that agency, they were very much a big part of the population was very opposed to that. So community engagement is vitally important. So as a sheriff, one, I'm going to lead the charge that I'm going to be engaging the community, and I'm also going to insist that my staff, my captains, my sergeants, my lieutenants, and my deputies are trained in community engagement, and that they also actively participate in looking for ways to lower crime in the community and partner with the community without just mass arrests. So demonstrating that behavior, providing them training. The community-oriented policing bureau should not be a bureau, it should be a philosophy of the entire organization, and that's what I plan to usher in. And that happens with interacting with faith-based organizations, working with folks that are community organizers and walking those peace marches with them, working with gang intervention workers. Those are things that I've done over the last 25 years. And I was doing it at a time when it really wasn't popular. Those are all the ideas that I have. Those are things that I've done. I've created youth centers, safe spaces for youth. I had a Weed and Seed federally funded site. I've sought financing from outside the organization so that these foundations and these philanthropic organizations really support our youth and try to stop that school to prison pipeline. So those are the kinds of things that I plan to continue doing.
Okay, thank you. Next question. If elected, how do you plan to build, recruit a workforce inclusive of African Americans?
Again, I've been in, first I've been Black my whole life and I've been in the organization, but I can tell you this has always been a challenge for us, particularly in law enforcement. You know, I'm not, unlike at least one of the other candidates, I'm not a second generation law enforcement officer. In fact, my father was in and out of the justice system. So, you know, for us, you know, we have to overcome the culture of, you know, us not liking the police, because when I joined, my mom said, "You got a degree, why you want to be a cop?" You know, so I even had to endure that myself. But it requires us to recruit in our communities, advertise in our newspapers, and actually reach out and provide those resources where we can hold people's hands, get them while they're younger in our Explorer programs, and really spend the time with them to engage them into law enforcement and really let them know, like, there's a way to make changes from within the system. It's hard to push back when you're outside the system, but it's a fantastic career that we shouldn't let other groups of people you know, take advantage of, because it's been a wonderful career for me. And I think that, you know, I can tell you, once you're inside the organization, I'm going to make sure that people feel welcome, because I can tell you, when I came on in 81, there were, you know, deputies that didn't look like us, you know, saying pretty crazy stuff and treating us pretty crazy. And so I want to make sure that once they're in the organization, they feel like they're part of the organization and that they're valued. And that's very important for the recruitment. And then recruiting, using the recruiters that look like us helps a lot. So our African-American men and women going out there and recruiting, as well as even our younger folks, our explorers, are really, really vitally important to really making that connection that it can be done.
Thank you. Third question before we go to the community questions or to questions in our chat is, if elected, what can you do to uncover and reduce the negative impact of unconscious bias within the Sheriff's Department?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, implicit bias is something that we all are victim of, even ourselves. And, you know, so obviously it begins with training and identifying what implicit bias is, and actually explaining to folks through that training how to identify it and how to work through it. Over and above that, I think we also need to make sure that it's not a one-time training, that it's done on a regular, recurring basis annually, so that, you know, people that, you know, they don't forget, or they're constantly reminded, kind of like our sexual harassment training. And then making sure that we have policies and procedures in place that identify, you know, people that are, you know, treating people disparately. Because when you look at our big data, there's a data system in the department that I helped create that identifies problematic employees sooner than later. And you can see these people where they're always pulling over African-American men or women, or they're saying things that are rude to people, identifying those people sooner than later, putting them into training, disciplining them when necessary, and then correcting that behavior. I also recently read a study in the Harvard Business Review that indicated that implicit bias training may not be the end all to be all to understanding implicit bias. And what really needs to happen is championing people of color, particularly Black people, of their achievements. People really react to achievements and demonstrable behaviors rather than just discussions. And by that, I mean, there's a study that was done where you use two different names, an African-American sounding name and another sounding name, and people automatically discount that African-American name's credibility. But once we identify, we publicly announce their achievements and their goals and the things that they've done, that really kind of it demonstrates the actual ability of people beyond color.
Thank you, Chief Rhambo. That concludes my question as specifics goes. I'm going to turn it over to my coalition sister, Nerida, and she'll take questions from the chat and the community. Again, thank you for being here with us this evening. Nerida?
Hi, good evening. So we do have several questions from the community in the chat. And so I will start with our first question from Dr. Theo Fowles. His question is, during your tenure within the department, what are some specific community organizations that you have worked with to better engage the community?
There have been many. So specifically, you know, Second Call, Ceasefire, the Nation of Islam, Minister Tony Muhammad, many faith-based organizations, and as well as, you know, PATH, HOPIX, those are homeless outreach organizers, and the Sherriff Youth Foundation. Those are philanthropic folks that really helped us fund some of these programs that we have that I actually championed inside the organization. So, specifically, those groups that are gang intervention workers. I work with LAPD's and Guillermo Cespedes over in the GRID program. We did a lot of community engagement there. Also did community engagement with like the API Youth Foundation and the API youth groups, as well as Latino youth organizations out there. I ran the VITA program, which was a youth intervention program, and also partnered with the Young Marines to send folks to Devil Pups programs that really brought some of those at-risk kids out of the community and put them into a more regimented environment. So there's been a number of organizations that I've worked with. NAJA, which is a national organization that deals with civil rights. I'm a member of that group in Compton, the Compton NAACP, and many groups like that.
Okay, great. Now, thank you, Chief Rhambo. So let me go to our next question. And our next question, there are two questions from AJ Ali. I'll ask the first, and then I'll cycle through the rest of the community and come back to him. And so his first question is, if elected, what will you do to, and note this is a four-part question, greatly increase the amount and consistency of tactical empathy training deputies receive, increase intentional, ongoing, and positive interactions between deputies and the rest of the community. 3, help people, especially young people, to respect and trust the Sheriff's Department instead of fear and hate it. And 4, interact in positive and loving ways with incarcerated people and returning citizens to reduce recidivism and help them and their families thrive, mentoring, job training, employment, etc.
All right, so let's take the first one, which was tactical empathy, I believe. So that is understanding that we often contact people that are at their, probably at their worst moment. And sometimes they're under the influence, sometimes they may be special needs, sometimes they may be, mentally ill. So training in how to engage folks like that is vitally important. We do that training now, but for instance, at the airport, I sent all of my my folks that deal with the unhoused and the mentally ill to crisis negotiations training, where we talk about how to slow things down, how to talk calmly, how not to yell, not point flashlights in their faces, and really de-escalate the situation as we're dealing with them in a tactical situation. They may be armed with something like a weapon other than a gun. And so you want to make sure that we slow things down and we try to calm the situation through tactical communication. So those are things that I've done in the past, and those are things I want to continue to do. And then making sure that deputies also, they have a tendency to feel like, well, you're not protecting us. My emphasis is that we're protecting not only the person, but we're also protecting you, because it's not uncommon for us to put hands on people, and next thing you know, we're hurt and we're injured. So it's really for the safety of everybody involved. The other question was,
yeah, the part 2, Chief Rhambo, was related to intentional, ongoing, and positive interactions between deputies.
So one of the things that I really want to encourage, and I did it myself, and you have to lead this by example, are little things like I used to go out and play basketball with the kids in Wilmington Arms. And through that interaction, I found out that one of the kids, who was only 9, was actually being parented by someone who wasn't even a member of his family. And that other kid himself was really a kid because his mom had abandoned him. But we didn't know that for months because no one asked, and they didn't feel comfortable telling me. So, going out and engaging the kids in just everyday activities, youth sports, youth activities, even working with some of our gang members who are out there. They want safety too, and they want interaction, and they want understanding and empathy, and really, lending a hand to say maybe they have a child that we can get into some tutoring classes, or we can find a scholarship for their child. So those intentional acts are going to be things that I'm going to direct in terms of training the deputy staff on how to do community engagement, because so often we're trained on how to arrest people, how to stay safe, laws of search and seizure, but we really aren't engaged in community outreach and community engagement unless we go to COPS Bureau. Well, I want to make sure that the entire department is trained in COPS philosophy so that community engagement becomes an everyday part of our culture. as an entire organization, not just as a specific bureau.
That's great. And then part 3,
Helping young people.
yeah, was related to the empathy. Well, actually, it was related to helping young people respect and trust the sheriff's department. Excuse me.
Yeah, this can be a little bit of a challenge. I was doing this in Compton, Watts, and South Central. Obviously growing up in South Central Los Angeles, and being around as far back as the 65 Watts riots, there's this culture we have in our community that we just don't like the police for whatever reason. We may have never even had interaction with them, but we just don't like them. But it really requires us to go out as law enforcement. We have to be the bigger persons to go out and really engage those youth and interact with them. I really want to start when they're young. When I was in Compton, I had my deputies go to kindergarten and nursery school classes and sit down and read with the kids, and really just so they could see this person isn't like the scary police, but they're almost a friend. They're reading books to them and they're maybe interacting with them when they're at a very young age. Because we're going to be fighting against sometimes the culture when they go home, forget the police, they're not your friend. So you get this weird, this dichotomy between what they just saw where the cop was reading to them and their parents saying, we don't like the police. So you're going to always have to have this engagement, and then also reaching out to the parents and letting them know that we're there for them if your child has some problems. I have some resources at the community college district or perhaps at the school district. We're certainly willing to go and engage and be that, that support for your child when they're there. And I did that with the VITA program. The VITA program, often we would actually go to the school and would help out the kid, finish their assignments, help them get off, if they were on probation, make sure that they stayed in line. So really being a friend to that child and really kind of holding their hand, and consistency, what I find over the long run is what is the best solution, because you can't be there for a moment. You got to be there for the kids on an ongoing basis. And so those kinds of programs and those kinds of behaviors are things that I'm going to encourage.
Okay, great, thank you. And the last part was in relation to interaction in positive and loving ways with incarcerated people and returning citizens.
Yeah, this one I really look. I love. This is something I really am anxious to get started as a sheriff, because I did this when I was in the department, and we did reentry programs. I lectured to the inmates in custody. We had the merit-based program, which is kind of an education-based incarceration program. I bought tattoo removal machines for them so they can get jobs. We identified that some of them, they couldn't read because they couldn't see. They didn't have access to health care, so they'd never been to an ophthalmologist and didn't realize they needed glasses. And so it's little things like that, and really lending a hand to the inmates in custody. And quite frankly, full admission, when I went into custody the first time, I saw half my classmates from Washington High in there. So they're people I know in custody, and so I empathize with them to a significant degree and can really relate to them. And so I want to change really the way custody feels. Now, there's 2 types of custody, and I don't think a lot of people may not realize that. So the Sheriff's Department houses people while they're going to trial, and then they also house the nonviolent, non-serious, non-sex offenders. It's a local prison system. So in that respect, if you've been sentenced to a nonviolent, non-serious, non-sex offense for however period of time, I want to make sure your jail environment is as close to the normal environment as possible. It's going to be a big sea change in terms of the culture of custody. And there's a Norwegian model that I've seen, and I really, really want to try that. I've also set up the 4 fire camps that are here in LA County. And so really making sure that when they come into custody, I want them to know the sheriff of LA County cares deeply about them. And I don't want to keep victimizing them after they've done their time. We continue to punish people when they leave. They can't live in Section 8 housing. They can't get a job. And so those are the kinds of things that we want to make sure that if I can teach you how to cook for 1,000 inmates, why can't I certify you to get a job outside to work at a hotel and advocate for that? So those are the kinds of things that I want to make sure that we're stopping that. I don't want to see you again. When you come into my custody, next time I see you, you're going to either be working for me or you'll be working for someone else. And those are the kinds of programs that I want to make sure I champion. Oh, you got muted.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to ask another question in the chat. First of all, thank you everyone for sharing your questions. This question is from Lanella Enix. Again, Lanella, if I did pronounce your name wrong, my apologies. The question is, if elected, What would you do to encourage officers to be their brother's keeper and support and protect those that intervene if their brother officers indulge in abusive and/or illegal behavior?
Well, one, we want to make sure we reward those officers, those deputies, with the behavior that we want them to emulate. So de-escalation awards. When I was in the department, and even the department I have now, I give people commendable restraint and de-escalation certificates. And I notice when they do things and just write them a little note of thanks, and we put that in their evaluation. And so, those behaviors that you reward, you get more of. And on the flip side of that, if something happens where I see that someone could have de-escalated or should have de-escalated, particularly a supervisor, then I'm going to, hold them accountable, have administrative actions. It may not result in a termination because the incident may not be that serious. However, what I want them to understand is that they have a role to play in keeping each other safe and keeping themselves going through this 30-year career and enjoying this retirement or whatever we're going to get at the end of that. And particularly with supervisors, they have a responsibility. They get the extra bucks, and I'm going to hold them to a higher standard. And so, but I'm going to train them. It's not going to be a surprise. I'm going to tell them up front, these are my expectations. And I want to make sure that they are also our brother's keepers and understand that the entire culture has to be where we have to keep each other safe and keep each other to the point where we can actually retire and enjoy ourselves at the end of our old age here.
Okay, no, great. Thank you so much. So our next question is from Dr. Carmen Downs, and her question is, what new or different practices will you implement that uncover potential implicit bias during the hiring process?
Well, one of the things I'm really thinking about and looking into is actually having us move away from doing the initial hiring. So, what I found, because when I was almost 40 years ago now, I actually sat on a panel to hire deputies, and I had never even been to patrol yet. So I actually had the power to hire or fire, make sure this person got through the process. I think that needs to be, there's a flaw in that system because it leaves too much to the individual who maybe isn't trained, who has implicit bias or whatever their issues are. So taking a look at an outside entity to do the hiring, it could be the county personnel department or a contracted person or a company that does the hiring. We want to look for those best practices throughout the nation that really eliminates the good old boy system where we're kind of only hiring people that we think are going to be the good cops. And so that practice is going to be something I'll take a really strong look at. And of course, it requires a meeting, confer with the labor unions and all that. But I think it's going to be something that's sorely needed. And guess what? If it doesn't work, we can always go back. But I think it has some merit.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this will be our final question. And this question is from Christina Moultrie. And her question is, why did you want to become a law enforcement officer?
I didn't. I didn't. I applied. I got a degree in sociology. I was going to be a wildlife game warden. I went to Humboldt State, and when I came back to LA, I applied for LAPD, the Sheriff's Department, and Colonial Life. And so the Sheriff's Department called me first, and I started out as a county lifeguard. So I worked with the deputies in the parks and stuff. And so, quite frankly, my parents you ain't got to go anywhere, but you got to get out of here. You got to get your own benefits and your own. So I sought a career, and this was an opportunity. And I certainly literally just kind of fell into it. I was really shocked that I actually got the job, because I can tell you, as I mentioned earlier, my dad was kind of justice involved, and I'm a junior, and they're looking at this background. They're like, is this you? I'm like, no, that's my dad. So, so it was really just by fate, actually it was just, look, my life has been kind of like Forrest Gump. I coming from an orphanage, I just can't tell you how really, really blessed I feel to even be able to be in this process. But I've worked hard, and I really love the career, and I love the profession. And you can see through all my endorsements that I'm a person who's collaborative and just really, really love, giving back to the community and working with the community. That's what this is about.
Great. Thank you so much, Chief Rhambo, for answering our questions this evening. And so now I'll move it back to our wonderful moderator, LaTanya Nelson.
Great. Again, thank you, Chief Rhambo. Now this time we'll give you 2 minutes for your closing remarks and anything else that you want to share with us at this time. Thank you.
Well, I just want to say thank you all for this moment. I looked at your website. You You guys are all very, very accomplished people. I feel completely humbled by all the doctors I talked to on this call. I will just tell you that, again, I want to emphasize that the Sheriff's Department is very large. It's very complex. It's $3 billion. It's the largest jail in the country. It's the 4th largest hospital here in LA County, the largest mental health facility. We patrol 1,100 square miles of ocean, everything from Catalina Island to Gorman. And I've worked in various capacities in all of those areas. This is not an easy job. Dealing with the internal culture of law enforcement in general is not an easy job. And I'm the only candidate who's got experience at the county level as well as the city of LA level. And I can tell you that the bureaucracy is Byzantine at best and the politics is heavy. So I come to you as the most experienced candidate ever. Takeaway, I'll be the first African-American in the seat. But I think that means something. I think it really is something telling about us as a people here in Los Angeles County. And I'm very optimistic that they'll make the right choice because I'm not just the first African-American, to sit in the seat. I am the most qualified person to have ever sat in this seat. And I know it's going to be a daunting task, but with all of us collectively together, I think we're going to make a new normal here in LA County in terms of law enforcement service delivery.
Okay, great. Thank you. Again, if your question was not answered this evening, we're going to make sure that we get those questions to Chief Rhambo and try to get an answer for you that we can share back with you at a later time. Again, thank you, Chief Rhambo. We're going to have closing remarks from my coalition sister, First VP Kimberly Watson.
So on behalf of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Los Angeles, we thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your patience and thank you for utilizing our platform to share your message with the community to assist them in making an informed decision. So thank you, Chief Rhambo. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Okay. Thank you all. I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
As Chief Rhambo leaves and our next candidate comes up, I want to go ahead for those who just came in a little late. Just again, thank you for joining us. And as a reminder, this is a nonpartisan forum. We're asking for everyone to please remain on mute. Our team will place a link in the chat that has videos on all the candidates to give you an opportunity to review at your own time or while you're on this session. Also, please place your questions in the chat, include your full name, email address, and the name of the candidate you want to answer, in case times runs out, or if you thought of a question that you wanted to ask our previous officers, we'll be glad to forward those questions too, so you could put those in the chat. We'll make sure they respond. Also, we are going to give our candidates 20 minutes to respond to questions, and they will have time to have 2 minutes closing. If he's on now, Fabra, Lieutenant Eric Strong.
Monique, explain if they want to pin them, how to do that. So that they
Oh,
get a better...
yes. Oh, yeah. So, we like gallery view because we just love to see everybody. But just in case you all want to pin Lieutenant Eric Strong, good evening, sir.
Good evening.
If you just go to the corner, the right-hand corner at the top where it says view, and you can just click speaker. And so every time the person, is speaking, they will just be in your main screen if you choose not to go with the gallery. With that being said, Latanya, go ahead. Thank you.
Good evening, Lieutenant Eric Strong. We thank you for joining us. My name is Tanya Nelson. I will be serving as the moderator this evening. We will have some specific questions for you that will be directed towards you. And then we have questions that are from the community and that are taken from the chat as we move along this evening as you give us your platform. So first off, give us a little, maybe 2 minutes about you, your history in general, and how you came to be in this platform and running for this position.
All right, well, good evening. Thank you all so much for hanging in there. I know this is a lot of work. I'm Eric Strong, and I was born and raised here in Los Angeles County. I've gone to school here. I've moved around a little bit, Carson area, San Pedro area, My mom and stepdad moved to La Mirada for a little bit. I've been a resident of Inglewood. I think I started living in Inglewood probably about 1989, and that's where we live now. I started law enforcement about 30 years ago. I have close to 30 years of experience. I have 3 different agencies under my belt. I've been in patrol. I've been to custody, courts. I've been on a SWAT team, been a gang investigator, worked internal affairs for many years, did some of the biggest investigations in the deputy gangs. I've been a unit commander of our South LA station, unit commander of audit and accountability, and a unit commander of our advocacy bureau. I have worked risk management, and I think for the most part, my experience, coupled along with my personal experience as a Black man growing up here in LA County, is what really gives me a 360-degree perspective of what we need between our law enforcement and our community. I did not have a goal to run for sheriff all throughout my career. It was after seeing so many failures in leadership, so many things that are going on. George Floyd being murdered in such a way, being here with the Rodney King incident, growing up here in LA and seeing that, close to 30 years later, not much has changed. And, I had an idea and a thought that I was going to leave this department and go elsewhere. However, after talking with my wife, we decided if we're going to do something, we need to make change here within the department. And I have to say, my wife is a 27-year veteran of this department. She was the unit commander of our food services bureau, so she brings a lot to the table as well. I am just a person that wants to do things right. I believe in compassion, dignity, and respect for all people. I am the only candidate that said no to building a new jail. I'm the only candidate that has pledged not to take money from the unions. I don't want to walk in the door with an IOU. I support measures that allow us to remove a sheriff if need be, because if we're doing what we're supposed to do, when we're supposed to do it, how we're supposed to do it, we don't care what kind of measures are in place, and we don't care what the consequences are. And that's pretty much what I stand for. I was in the Marine Corps. I've spent a lot of time coaching youth programs. I coached all of my kids growing up at Darby Park and Ladera Park. Participate in a lot of stuff, just kind of community active, and I'm ready to answer your questions.
Okay, thank you for that. So let's just jump right into it. First question is, if elected, what will your plans be to improve the relationship between the community and law enforcement?
When elected, first thing we have to do is we have to get out there with community engagement, and we have to really, truly believe in the fact that we need a relationship with our communities. One is I'm going to put community first. We have to realize that we are public servants to the community, and we have to put them first. The second thing is I want to create and convene community stakeholders at every station, which is in a sense a level of oversight. What the community residents need in San Dimas at the foothills of the mountains is not the same thing that the residents need or are looking for in Cerritos. What the residents are looking for in Compton is obviously not the same thing as what they need in Malibu. So we need community stakeholders, we need community groups at every station so that they can be part of the decision-making process. They can help drive policy. They can be part of the review process. And that's where we really kind of start in terms of getting some things going. But also very importantly is we get out there and we work with our kids. We work with our youth. I worked at a youth center for many years, and that's where I really engaged with the youth, and we put together curriculums, character development, leadership, alternative programs. We continue to engage with the community, and we participate in community events. I think one of the other things that I know was very successful is we used to put teams. We would take a team from our station and put it into the local rec league. It might be an adult basketball league. These are all things where people get to see us as a real person, somebody behind the uniform, behind the black and white car. And it starts with just a natural flow of engagement. A lot of these kind of magic buzzwords, the community policing and cops and all that kind of stuff, this needs to be a department-wide type of mentality.
Okay, thank you. Number 2, if elected, how do you plan to build, recruit a workforce inclusive of African Americans?
Wow, that's a big one. I could tell you that in all my years in the sheriff's department, it's pretty deliberate and intentional that we don't have more Blacks. I don't think we've ever had a population more than 10% on our department. And anytime anybody tells you, well, hey, the population of LA County is 8% Black, so our department meets that that is a racially motivated hiring practice, because what they're basically telling you is we got to our quota and we're going to stop. And I know personally, I know firsthand where it has been told, hey, we don't need to hire anymore. Our own son, our oldest son, applied for the department. I have a cousin whose son applied for the department and they were disqualified. And these were developmental positions because we didn't need any more at the time. So number one is recruitment. We got to get out there. We got to let people know. I try to attend second call when I can. I would normally be there on a Thursday, where they take people that have been formerly incarcerated and some not, and they create union jobs. They create union electricians, union carpenters. And just after going there for a period of time, I remember one guy telling me, he says, Eric, I've never told a young person on the streets to be a police officer, but what you're saying makes sense. We need to have the people in the streets to definitely tell them to come and join the department. And there may be some, because of record or because of backgrounds, that may not be able to be a sworn police officer, but we have so many jobs in this department. We have electricians, we have plumbers, we have what we call law enforcement technicians, we have dispatchers. There's no reason that they cannot hold these middle-class working jobs. The only reason it doesn't happen is because it's deliberate and intentional. So with me in the helm, I'm going to be very blatant with it. I'm going to be very deliberate. We are going to hire. We are going to get our percentages up, and I'd like to see them start with a 20, a 2, to get our people in terms of our population with the Black communities. But it's going to come from recruiting. It's going to come from encouraging. And it's going to come from us really looking at our background process and changing out the people that have been doing the backgrounds, that have been disqualifying people for minor things, and putting people in there that are empathetic, that can understand the community and actually do proper background investigations.
Thank you. Last question before we go to the chat, our community questions. If elected, what will or can you do to uncover and reduce the negative impact of unconscious bias within the Sheriff Department?
That is something that I have been working on my entire career. And the way we reduce it, well, uncover it is number one, to be able to recognize. I mean, unconscious bias is just that. It's people that who automatically jump to a belief or a judgment, and we all have it. And where I think it's important is I have gone out at the FBI National Academy and taught about this very thing. How do we deal with diverse communities? How do we build relationships with diverse communities? And this is one of the classes that I've taught, and it has to come through deliberate education. It has to come through deliberate exposure. When we look at the training within the Sheriff's Department in terms of how we develop a leader, they're showing movies like Red October. What I do when I go to training is I ask people, hey, who here are war buffs? Who likes really war movies? Who likes the Private Ryans and the Band of Brothers? And a whole bunch of people raise their hand, and I start asking them, can you tell me who the Red Tails are? Can you tell me about Tuskegee Airmen? Can you tell me about, the 101st? Can you tell me about these other things, since you like war movies so much? What do you really know? I mean, and it goes on and on. We talk about that with NASA, with sports, with science, anything. And it's about educating people and letting them know these are the contributions that have been made, and most people don't even know about it. Most people in law enforcement, if they weren't taught, if they weren't raised, they only see what they've been shown either on the media, or they get hired at 21, 22 years old, never having been exposed to Blacks, growing up in Orange County, and then we put them in our jails and we let them sit there for 3 or 4 years. We need to change that practice as well. So we need to do a better job at hiring. We need to do a better job, number one, from day one, in terms of our education, in terms of diversity, in terms of exposure, and the assignments with which we assign our personnel to various stations and facilities, and just be very deliberate in education and exposure.
Thank you for those answers. Appreciate it. And thank you for joining us again this evening. Now I'm going to turn it over to my coalition sister, Nerida, and she's going to take the questions from the chat in the community. Nerida.
Thank you, Latanya. Good evening, Lieutenant Strong. We have a few questions in the chat. And so this first one is from Dr. Marcette Fauché. There are a few questions. They're kind of linked together as a follow-up. So I will ask the first one. If elected, will you increase or decrease the number of concealed carry weapon permits in Los Angeles County?
Oh, I'm not muted. Okay. There is a very set criteria for concealed carry weapons. I am not seeking to increase it in any way, shape, or form. However, I do also know, unfortunately, I can tell you that there are many people that have businesses that are legitimately in need of concealed carry permits, and they can't get them. And I can tell you, I've talked to people, and oftentimes it's because of the color of their skin, or many of the people that are getting them are because they donated to a campaign or they donated to a cause. So that will definitely stop. That will not be my practice. I will not give carried concealed permits because somebody donated. We will look at the criteria, and if people fit it, we will evaluate it, and we will see, if it's responsible to award a CCW. It's not going to be the first thing on my agenda to go in and decrease, and I definitely won't be looking to increase.
Okay, no, great, thank you. And so a follow-up on that, which I think you somewhat touched on in your response, is what types of changes will you make to the CCW process?
Again, it's going to be about the proper evaluation and a significant background check. That background check will need to be ongoing. Oftentimes, we can have somebody with a CCW today, and if that CCW is good for 2 years, we don't look at them for another 2 years. What I want to implement are protocols that do a recheck, whether it be random through an audit, or if it's a possibility to do a recheck for everybody, because somebody could have a CCW today, be involved in a domestic violence incident, 4 or 5 months later, and then we don't know that, we don't see that, or they could have a restraining order put against them for whatever reason. We don't know that, we don't see that if we do not evaluate it again from a year to 2 years later. So there are some very specific protocols, because I've seen that actually happen, that we need to put in place that offer protections and responsibility in conducting our CCW background checks.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And so another question in the chat is from Rashawn Chavis, and her question is, do you believe that there is a place for enforcement within the homelessness crisis, and what will that look like?
For law enforcement or for enforcement?
I believe enforcement.
Okay, so I don't believe that law enforcement should be the first point of contact with the unhoused. There's so many different populations dealing with the unhoused. So I don't think that we're going to find any of the solutions to those variable populations inside our jail cells. However, what people often look at is they look at who does the unhoused victimize, and we don't look at who victimizes the unhoused. So there is a room for enforcement there on both sides. We need to be able to look at who's being preyed on and who's being the victim, who's being the suspect. And oftentimes we always go to the homeless person as the suspect. So there is a level of enforcement. It's about public safety. It's about protecting people. It's about conducting investigations. And that's just like dealing with any person that we come across. We have to provide them with the same public safety and the services that they would need. And that would be our level of enforcement. We shouldn't be dealing with the mentally ill issues. We shouldn't be dealing with the addiction issues. So I'm hoping that's answering your question as far as the enforcement piece.
No, thank you so much. And our next question is from AJ Ali. And his question is, if elected, what will you do to greatly increase the amount and consistency of tactical empathy training deputies receive so they can show and be loved in the community?
It's so interesting that you bring that up, because here's the thing, in all my time in this department, that has never been something that's talked about from the top down. The messaging from the top down for decades has been, go take people to jail, go write tickets, go take cars. That's how you demonstrate that you're an outstanding or great cop or deputy sheriff. And so my message from the very beginning is not about buzzwords. It's not about community policing. It's not about, community policing is important, but it's about respect, dignity, and compassion being the cornerstones of every interaction, not only from those people that are out there driving the black and whites, but also those people that are working in our custody. It's also going to come from hiring the right people that can be empathetic. I grew up in LA County. I've been profiled by law enforcement. I've been roughed up by law enforcement. I have family members that have been incarcerated. I have family members that have been victim of violent crime. So, that empathy needs to come from, again, understanding what people go through. And that's part of the education. That's part of the messaging that starts from day one. And it's part of the demonstrated leadership. And one of the things that we'll do is we're going to bring in people from the outside to come and help bring proper leadership to the Sheriff's Department. We've been talking about a lot of these issues from decades. The messaging has never been on the inside from the top down to be empathetic. As a matter of fact, the message has been quite the opposite. There's a lot of people that will tell you, we did this, we did that, but you did it because you got grant money. We didn't do it from our heart. And that's what I think really needs to change. And that's what you'll get from me, because it will be demonstrated. I'll lead by example.
Okay, no, great. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Strong. So at this time, I do believe that that might conclude our questions for you this evening, but we did want to give you an opportunity to also have closing remarks. So I will turn it back over to our moderator, LaTanya Nelson.
Thank you, Nerida. Again, your questions that you dropped in the chat or that you have, we will try to get them to Lieutenant Eric Strong for answers, and we'll get them back to you. However, again, thank you, Lieutenant Eric Strong. We want to give you an opportunity to give us some closing remarks this evening as we move along in our program. It's on you.
Thank you all so much for this opportunity. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I just want to say I have 30 years of experience in law enforcement. I have the leadership ability to do this job. And what we're talking about is setting the tone for the largest sheriff's department in the country. You'll have other people out there that will tell you it's about a title, it's about experience. I mean, 30 years is nothing to shake a stick at. Being a unit commander in some of our large bureaus is nothing to shake a stick at. But we've had a lot of people in positions. They had seats at the table, and what's really changed? Nothing. And the reason is because we have a failed department with failed leadership. In our department, in order to get into the executive ranks, there is no legitimate, testable, grievable process. It is just simply a tap on the shoulder, which means the sheriff comes to you and says, hey, you do things my way, deliver my message when, where, why, and how I tell you to, and I'll give you this path to better living. And people say, okay, and they take it. And then they say, if you do that for me good for a year or two, I'll give you another position and another position. That's no way to select the largest, the leadership in the largest sheriff's department in the world. I want to bring programs into our jails for our incarcerated folks so that they come out better than when they went in. Second call, ceasefire. These are programs that are supporting me, that Skip Townsend is endorsing me. These are programs that I truly believe in, because again, my family members have experienced that. We need to make sure that people get the sources, the resources, and the services in order to have sustainable solutions. Mental health, addiction, we're not finding those solutions inside the jail. I'm the only one that said no to building a new jail. I want to build new beds. Not only is that going to make people better, but it's going to create union jobs. It's going to create middle-class people for social workers, mental health workers, health workers to be there to work. These are the kind of things that are going to make LA County better. Please don't believe anybody that tells you that if we want to do things and if we want to care about people, if we want to give services, that it means that we're going to let all these violent criminals out to the world and that we're going to have to fire 1,000 deputies. We can have both. I'm here to commit to that and do just that for you. Thank you for your time. I humbly ask for your support, and just Google, do your homework. Check out my website. It's strong4sheriff.com, and hope to answer some more questions in the chat. I understand you'll be sending them to us.
Yes, that is correct. You will get them. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to, thank you again to my coalition sister, Kimberly Watson, for closing remarks. Kimberly.
Hello. So on behalf of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, we would like to thank you for your participation and joining us today. We appreciate your patience and allowing us to utilize our platform to share your message with the community to assist them in making an informed decision. So thank you again. We appreciate your time, Lieutenant Strong.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. And I'll just put my contact information in the chat.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
You too.
Thank you so much, everyone. We have one more candidate. And please note that Sherriff Villanueva was supposed to be with us today, but something came up in terms of his scheduling, so he wasn't able to make it. I want to make this announcement for those who just came in, and thank you for joining us. Again, this is a nonpartisan forum. We're asking everyone to please remain on mute. Our team will place a link in the chat that has videos on all of the candidates for your review. Please place your questions in the chat, include your full name email address, and the name of the candidate you want to answer in case time runs out. Our organization asks the candidates team to respond to your questions within a week's time of this forum. If you don't, get your questions answered this evening. Candidates will have 20 minutes. Well, in this case, he's our last one, so he'll just ride us out. But we will give him the last 2 minutes for closing statements. I will turn this over once again to our illustrious moderator, LaTanya Nelson. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Good evening, Commander Eli Vera. Thank you for
Please,
joining us.
call me Eli, please.
All righty, no problem. Eli, thank you for
Yes.
joining us this
Thank you.
evening. We appreciate you being here to kind of share with us your platform and to give us, ask some questions for us that we have. We have some specific questions for you three to be exact. And then we have questions that are coming from the community and also that have been placed in the chat. Again, I'm LaTanya Nelson, moderator. So we're gonna go get started. First thing is, tell us in like 2 minutes or less, a little bit about your background and how you came to be in this position running for sheriff.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me tonight. It's truly an honor and a privilege to be here with you. A little bit about myself. I am a true native-born Angelino. My mother immigrated here to this country with my sister. I was born in a county hospital in downtown LA. I was raised in Section 8 housing just west of downtown LA and a product of the Los Angeles Unified School District. So I'm pretty much an Angelino through and through. When I graduated high school, I enlisted in the Marine Corps, quite frankly, because we couldn't afford college. That just wasn't an option for us. And I had the privilege of serving as a Presidential Honor Guard in Washington, D.C. When I finished my tour, I joined the Sheriff's Department back in 1988. And I spent in excess of about 33 and a half years with the Sheriff's Department until I retired last month. I spent the majority of my career working in a patrol environment, specifically in South Los Angeles, for well over 17 years. I held every rank in this organization up to division chief. I was the commanding officer of South Los Angeles Station when the Vera Institute for Justice, a national institution, named my station when I was the captain as the patrol station of the year as a result of transparency and accountability. And that was a nationwide award that I was very proud of because it was built on relationships with the community and support from the community. I'm a former SWAT commander in the department, but most importantly, I'm a balanced individual that understands that public safety is very important and it is paramount, but we have to get down to the root causes. And the root causes, in my opinion, are the lack of a rehabilitative process or a system in the county jails. And number two, not properly investing in our at-risk youth. And that's why my wife and I were foster parents, not to kids that were coming through the system through the normal process, but our children all came through our direct contact with them in the field when mom or dad were going to, let's face it, to prison at that point, and they were falling into the foster care system. So we had the opportunity to open the doors of our home to kids that we encountered in La Puente and Inglewood and in various places in LA County. And it really has brought me that balanced approach to law enforcement. So that's just a little bit about myself.
All righty, thank you, appreciate you. Let's get right into asking our first question. If elected, how do you plan to build, recruit a workforce inclusive of African Americans?
Very good question. So one of the first things that I will do when I'm elected is to really just state to my deputies what my expectations are for the job that they're sworn to do. And that is really to keep the peace in the communities. That is our primary purpose. I will actively listen to our communities and to the stakeholders. We need to prove that the broken trust that was really created now and exacerbated under the current sheriff can be fixed. But we need to be able to fix ourselves first and foremost. We have to prove to the community that we're willing, we're open, and we're capable to allow the mechanisms that are necessary, like oversight, like the COC, like the Inspector General, to operate properly, eliminate issues like the deputy click gang issue that we hear about all the time, so that we can start to begin to earn that public, I don't even want to call it trust. I'm going to call it confidence, because we're so far away from trust. We have to start to build public confidence before we can build that public trust.
Okay, thank you. Next question. If elected, what will your plans be to improve the relationship between the community and law enforcement?
Okay. Well, I want to start by boosting a program that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is the Explorer programs, so that we can have our African-American teens and Hispanic teens, our kids of color, and encourage them to join and help with making a difference in our communities. You know, I will always look within our county agencies and encourage our current employees that work for other county governance, other county agencies, to apply to the Sheriff's Department as well. We also need to look for applicants with varied life experiences and take them in and not disqualify them during the application process just because they have some trivial issues. You know, I want to take a serious look at our foster care system. That, like I said, that's something that's very near and dear to my heart. So in regards to mentoring children that are in the foster care system for job placement, both on the sworn side of the department and on the professional side of the department. This is actually something I did when I was the commanding officer of South LA, not only with our foster kids, but our at-risk kids in our communities. I would bring in a subject matter experts to teach our kids how to pass entry-level county exams so they could have a fighting chance when they graduated high school.
Thank you. My last question is, if elected, what will or can you do to uncover and reduce the negative impact of unconscious bias within the Sheriff's Department?
Another excellent question. I believe it really starts with communication and honesty. Being aware is really the first step in unconscious bias. And, you know, I have to, you have to be able to understand internally how it affects others. You know, you have to question yourself and you have to question others. You have to create inclusive practices within the department and create, you know, supportive dialogue within the department with our communities that we serve. But I must have to say very clearly that the leader, it has to start with the leader. It has to be the actions that I take and what I model in this very critical issue. So it starts at the top in what I bring to the table and how open I am to addressing this issue. This is an issue sometimes my deputies, sometimes I break it down to them very simply like this, Ms. Nelson, because sometimes they're not that open to listening to this. And so I flipped the script a little bit on them. And I'm like, how many of us have experience, especially us employees or that come from, you know, minority neighborhoods of Black and brown colored, you know, communities here. We tell our kids quite often, hey, you know, see that police officer over there, if you don't behave, you know, we're gonna tell them to come arrest you. Well, we don't realize that we're creating that bias even within the kids at the young age. Why do I use that example? Because that's an example that they can connect to pretty easily. But if that can affect them in such a simple way as that, how about all the other issues that we've had throughout the years? The negativity and negative contacts with law enforcement. There's so many things there to unpack, but it has to start, I believe, at the top of the organization and what I model as the sheriff of Los Angeles County. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
That's okay. No, it's great. Great. Thank you for those answers, questions that were just asked. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to my coalition sister, Nerida, and she's going to take from here with the questions community and those questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're on mute, Nerida. Mute. Unmute yourself.
I know I am. Thank you. So good evening, Eli. We do have some questions for you in the chat. Our first question is from AJ Ali, and his question is, if elected, what will you do to greatly increase the amount and consistency of tactical empathy training deputies receive so they can show and be loved in the community?
You really have some great questions here today. I have to commend all of you for those questions. Part of the problem that we have in law enforcement is that our law enforcement deputies deal with so much negativity, and the leadership fails to recognize that if you don't intercede and create a different aspect to law enforcement, you're helping to create a system that jades your officers. Like I mentioned earlier, I was raised off of Vermont and really a product of LA. But when you start doing the job for a while and you see the just some of the terrible things that you see, it starts to affect you in a negative way. And that's why I always talk and model the balanced policing style, the relationship-based policing style. We have to train our deputies to plug them into and getting them to recognize what is the bigger success. Is it permanent incarceration as a result of a crime? Or is it the satisfaction that you played a role in changing the trajectory of someone's life? I can tell you this, some of the things that I've enjoyed the most in my life have come as a result of coming in contact with someone that I arrested years ago. And one of the things that I would say religiously, and I taught my deputies all the time to consider when you make an arrest, is when you're talking to them, you need to make sure you give them hope. Okay, people need hope. And I would say over and over again, this situation does not need to necessarily be the issue that that distinguishes or defines the rest of your life. But you can make it a definitive moment in your life because you're better than this. Okay, and in giving people hope and teaching your officers to make sure that you're treating other human beings and looking for the redeemable values in every single human being you contact, regardless of the circumstances that you find them in, because we find them at the worst points of their life. And if we allow ourselves to become desensitized and treat them in a manner that's less than you would want to be treated yourself, you're going down a slippery slope. Now, all this is wonderful, but if you don't have follow through and you don't have the ability to get your deputy sheriffs to partner with things that are outside of law enforcement, those things like the rehabilitation, true rehabilitation to prevent recidivism, coaching, getting involved with your at-risk kids, that's how you start to change the whole dynamic. And that's how you keep your officers really to be what they said they were going to be when they start. You know, what do cops always say? We came on to help people. Okay, we need to change the system. So the system is only not just focused on the enforcement side of it, but the other side that's just as critical. And again, it starts with the sheriff. And this is what I've lived throughout my entire career. I didn't have to reinvent myself to do this. You know, I never intended on running for sheriff until things got to the point that they are today, that I looked at LA County, and I'm petrified that I'm going to experience what I experienced in 1992. I spent the entire 90s in patrol in South Los Angeles, and it wasn't just the riots. What happened? Our communities were devastated, and it took well over a decade, years, before you started to bring in an infusion of businesses. And I think that right now we're at that point that unless you bring in some leadership that can bring down the temperature and start to work in a real manner, listening to the community and working, being part of the community, we're one incident away from going down that road again. So it's a long-winded answer, but really it's a passion that we have to be those types of individuals that really esteem others greater than oneself. That's how you start to change that dynamic.
Okay, no, great. Thank you so much for your response. And so our next question in the chat is, how will you foster a good relation between Brown and Black communities? And this question is from Rashawn Chavis.
Yes. Once again, I think it starts at the top, and how those relationships are, and how you foster those relationships. For me, that's nothing new. You know, some of my closest friends, and I can't give it all away, but this kind of parallels to my vision for the Sheriff's Department. By chance, from the Marine Corps is a local police chief who happens to be African American. And my vision is bringing in someone like him, more likely him, but I can't say by name because he's a current sitting police chief, and it'll put him in a cross with his department, and bring in at the very highest levels of the organization somebody that's going to work alongside of me that has credibility in the community. So we'll have in my case, if I'm elected, a Hispanic sheriff working alongside a well-respected from the community, been involved for years, African-American chief with an outside perspective to show our deputy sheriffs right from the onset how we're going to work together, how we're going to impact our communities, and how we're going to make sure that we're fostering an environment that reduces the tension between the Hispanic communities that sometimes can thrive, right? We've seen it in our schools and the African-American communities. Unfortunately, I think these issues have actually grown in the last few years, because when I went to high school in LA City, the tensions weren't the same that they were today. And it hurts to see two groups of people that have been through so much become divisive. But I think that we can do it. I think that we can partner together. I think that what we model, and being open and responsive to those communities, especially those that critique us, right? So when you bring these two entities together and you're open, and not just open, but actually responsive to those critiques, and you listen to what the concerns are, and you do it in a manner that's together, I just think that you're able to change the thought process, both internally and externally, because it can't just be focused on one. It has to be, focused both inside the organization and outside of the organization. It doesn't need to be that way. I think that we're ready across Los Angeles County to make those kind of changes. And if we can be effective here, what kind of impact can we have across the country and across the state? So I think it's really a decision to work closely together. But I think if your instincts are right and you have a love for one another anyway, it comes naturally. It's something that's instinctive. It's in your DNA.
Great, thank you so much. And so our next question is from, just scrolling a little bit, from Lynette Enix. And the question is, if elected, what would you like your relationship to be with the Board of Supervisors?
So because I have 33 years on the job and I've had a command positions, I already have a very, very good working relationship with almost the entire Board of Supervisors. Not all, because I haven't worked with one or two of them directly, but the majority of them I have during the course of my career worked with them collaboratively, closely. And the ones that I haven't, I've actually worked for their high-level chiefs of staff and other field deputies. So for me, this is not going to be an issue. This is something that's going to change day one. You're not going to see the public display ever during my administration. You're not going to see the disrespect for others. Especially, you have to keep in mind, we have a male sheriff, and for the first time in the history of Los Angeles County, we have an all-women Board of Supervisors. I've told pretty much every one of them that I've seen, that will stop, that behavior will stop on day one, because that relationship is critical. And right now, you know who's really truly suffering, unfortunately? It isn't the Sheriff's Department. It isn't the Board of Supervisors. It's the community, because the board doesn't trust the sheriff to do what he's supposed to do. And you always hear this conversation about defunding and I'm being defunded and this and that. The reality is the Board of Supervisors is not defunding the Sheriff's Department. It's Alex Villanueva's mouth that is really defunding this department, and the inability and refusal to build that relationship. That is not going to be a problem day one. Not only will I have a very good working relationship with every one of those board members, I'm going to have a very good working relationship with our Inspector General, which I already have. So I'll just take it a step further. I think we've all seen in the news, right? This latest use of force that's been a scandal throughout Los Angeles County, with the deputy kneeling on the head of an inmate in one of our courthouses, and how the sheriff has denied his knowledge in this. Well, I'm the person that brought it to the Inspector General, because when I saw that, I recognized there's no possible way that we can allow for this type of behavior to be occurring. So I brought it to the Inspector General. I did my job. That's the way I'm going to do my job across the board, whether it's with the Inspector General, the COC, or the Board of Supervisors. But you will never see the public displays of disdain, arguments, disrespect out of the Sheriff's Department when and if I'm elected Sheriff of Los Angeles County. It will never happen.
Okay, no, thank you so much. And so there are some additional questions in the chat. We'll be sure to send them to your office so that you'll have a chance to respond. And so at this time, we will move back to our wonderful moderator, LaTanya Nelson. So thank you, Eli.
Thank you, ma'am.
Again, thank you, Eli. As my coalition sister Narita said, we will get the questions to you so that we can get answers back to our community and those in the chat. This time, we're going to give you 2 minutes to kind of wrap it up and give us your closing remarks as we close our program out. Thank you again for joining us.
Well, thank you again for having me tonight. Honestly, it was really a privilege to be here today. And I want to commit to you right now that regardless of what happens, if I'm elected sheriff, you will have a partner. Not only will you have a partner, you're going to have a responsive partner. I will avail myself. I believe that passionately that an elected sheriff needs to be responsive to our community, and you will have that partner in me. There's a reason why at the end of the day, I got endorsements from 2 very key groups that are very different. One group, the LA County Peace Officers, Professional Peace Officers Association, that represents all our professional staff or civilians inside the Sheriff's Department and our supervision in the Sheriff's Department, because they recognize we are broken. We need a change. And they recognize the fact that I know this organization in and out. I know our weaknesses. I've studied what we've done wrong, what needs to change, and I'm capable of making those changes on day one. But I also received the endorsement of CASE, and CASE is the largest association of attorneys in the state of California outside of the state bar. And that's a very diverse group of attorneys that have different areas of expertise. Because at the end of the day, I am that balanced individual that really truly has a love for fellow man, that is committed to change in this organization and committed to lead the Sheriff's Department, not back to what we may have done sometimes at a better than before, but forward. And my vision for the Sheriff's Department is that your law enforcement deputy sheriff is somebody that's a resource, that is not just there to affect an arrest, but is actually a walking resource that can connect our community members with the help that may be needed, whether it's financial, mental health, all these different opportunities that a law enforcement officer could be, the peace officer that he should be. I'm going to champion a true rehabilitative process in the jail system. I'm a big, big fan of working with our vocational industries because we have those contracts in LA already. And I'll leave you with this. Can you imagine a simple process? We run the largest sheriff's jail in the country. If we partner with these unions that we have relationships with, we can take our inmates through this vocational process, complete the training, have a living wage job opportunity for them as they come out the door, where they can actually have a chance in life when they step out of the jail system. We have the space. What we don't have is the relationships. These things that I envision for the Sheriff's Department, I can't do it by myself, but I know I can do it with all of you and with your support so that we can start to drop recidivism. I will be that balanced deputy sheriff, that sheriff for you, that professional. And I'm just honored for the opportunity to be here today, and thank you so much. And if you have any questions, please contact me. Any question at all, I have no problem at all answering them.
Okay, thank you, Eli. We appreciate you being here again this evening, sharing with us. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to my coalition sister, Kimberly, who's going to take us out.
Thank you.
So on behalf of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Los Angeles, we thank you for your time. We thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your patience and allowing us to and utilizing our platform to share your message with the community to assist them in making an informed decision. Thank you so much, and we wish you well.
Thank you. Have a great night. Take care.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Dr. Downs, would you like to say any parting words or to our community?
Yes, I would. Let me unpin you so I can see everyone's smiling face. So thank you so very much. As I heard all of the candidates, it actually gave me a completely different view of just some of their perspectives, right? So, and that's what this is all about, bringing the candidates to the community so that you can hear firsthand from them to make an informed decision. And just to echo what was said earlier, we're a nonpartisan organization. So please understand we're not endorsing candidates, but we want to make sure that you hear the candidates and their platform. So on behalf of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Los Angeles chapter, don't drop off too soon because I just want to shout out the Public Policy Committee. They are outstanding. Can you all give them a virtual round of applause? Thank you so much for all that this committee does. This is an election year, a primary year. I just can't thank you all enough for what you do every day. So thank you again, and we will see you at the next forum.